Morning. This is Carol Merritt. It is April 3rd, 2006, and I'm in the home of the Reverend Joseph Boone, speaking with him this morning about his experiences, and also he's joined by Mrs. Alethea Boone. So welcome to both of you to this interview this morning. I just wanted to say how much I've appreciated reading about and learning about Reverend Boone's participation in the movement. So I'm anxious this morning to hear about his contributions, and I understand, Mrs. Boone, that you will be sharing in this interview with us. The first thing I really would be interested in knowing is where Reverend Boone came from. What's his background?
Reverend Boone was born in Cedartown, Georgia, to the parents of John Boone and Mattie Boone, Mattie Roberts Boone. And of course, he received his early elementary education there, along with 4 other siblings.
Okay. What's his educational background?
He's a graduate of Booker T. Washington High School here in Atlanta, because the family had moved to Atlanta of the circumstances. He's a graduate of Houston-Tilliston College in Texas, and Gammon Theological Seminary here in Atlanta.
Okay. Did he ever share with you any of his recollections of growing up here in Atlanta?
Oh, several of his friends would tell me how they played football for Washington High School, and of course how he would be without lunch. At that time they didn't have a lunch program, and he would always have a game that he played with one of his best friends, Red George, and he would always win the nickel. And that way, if he won the nickel, he could go to the store and he would buy the big moon cakes, penny each, and he would have the 5 moon cakes. And of course, Red George lost.
Okay.
That was his favorite story.
That's a great story. What about growing up in Atlanta? And I'm not sure, when did he come to Atlanta? Do you know when he left Cedartown and came to Atlanta?
That year, at the moment, I'm not sure. I can research that for you, but I'm not sure what year that was. But that was back, I can imagine, in the early 40s.
When he was about how old?
Must have been about 12.
Okay.
12.
Okay.
Because I did meet a friend who said he went to one of the elementary schools with her.
Okay. Do you recall which elementary school?
Not at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. So being in Atlanta during that period, I understand he was born September 19th, 1922. So being in Atlanta in the 30s and the 40s, that had to have been quite an experience in terms of Jim Crow. You did not arrive in Atlanta until when?
I came permanently in 60.
In 60, okay.
In 60.
Okay. Do you recall him ever sharing with you any memories of Jim Crow in Atlanta?
Basically, it was really 2 worlds. There were 2 worlds, and he would talk about how they had to ride the trolley.
Okay.
The tracks, the car with the tracks. And of course, it was the same pattern throughout the South. You had to get on, and move to the back. And if the trolley was full, you had to stand up. Of course, you never ventured past that part where that door opened for you to get off. That front part was reserved for the others. And of course, they always packed in the back.
Okay. So when you came to Atlanta permanently, what was your recollection? How did you feel about, what was your experience with Atlanta?
My experiences with Atlanta were really somewhat limited. I moved around in the circle of the church members. The church.
And this church was?
That was Rush Memorial Congregational Church.
Okay.
I do recall having had, now that I look back on it, an unpleasant experience, you might call it, or it was really by design. I was shopping for maternity material. My sister-in-law was going to make me some maternity clothes. And of course, we were at Rich's. I think that was the 4th or 5th floor where they had the fabric. And I had to use the restroom. Of course, we had to go down, all the way down into the basement to use the restroom. And by the time we used the restroom down there, and I got back up to the 5th floor, 5th floor for the material, I had to go again. When there were really restrooms along the way that I shouldn't have had to constantly go down to the bottom floor. But that was one experience I remember very, very vividly after things moved on and got better.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you meet your husband?
I was teaching in Anniston, Alabama. I had been given a position there as a foreign language teacher, teacher of English, teacher of drama. You had to do a lot of things then. And he was the minister at the First Congregational Church there. My landlady, Mrs. Powles, invited me to a banquet that her church gave. And it was there that we met. He was sitting across the table from Mrs. Powles. And someone introduced us, and we met, we started talking. He found out that I had gone to Talladega College, right, not very far from Anniston, just a few miles. So we had hit it off real well, conversation-wise.
Okay. So you were married before coming to Atlanta?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess what I also want to know is how he came into the ministry. Why the ministry? Why the Congregational Church?
Okay. The ministry. I really feel that in Texas, he was a very popular, he's always been a very popular individual.
Okay.
And most popular with the females. And I don't really know exactly what he was doing, but they didn't tell me all of the story. But he was stabbed severely one night by a young lady.
He was what?
Stabbed.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
he was stabbed by a young lady.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of feel that he was playing the field or whatever occurred in his life. And seemingly this was the turning point when he decided he wouldn't do all those things he had been doing. He would kind of mellow out. And he decided that his calling should be the ministry. So he came after finishing. He did some work in New York as a longshoreman, I understand.
Okay.
And he came back to Atlanta to go to Gammon.
Okay. Had he always been in the Congregational Church?
No, they were Methodist. The entire family were Methodist. I can't imagine. He never really told me why he went into the Congregational Church, but I can imagine it was kind of like a recruiting thing. The policy and the practices of the AMA, the American Missionary Association, and the Congregational Church had been one kind of, well, we don't say leniency, whereby some churches were very, very rigid in dogma and what you could do, what you could not do. The Congregational Church was more flexible, more outgoing, more lenient, and seemingly this went to his style a little bit more. I never heard him say exactly why, but I can imagine it's kind of like choosing a college or choosing a profession that this fits your pattern of thinking or what you really feel that you should be doing.
What had he studied at Houston Tillotson?
Physical education.
Physical education, okay.
And he had done a little coaching here at Carver. Before he went to Gammon, I understand.
But by this time he was already a minister, by the time he was coaching?
No. He coached that little bit, that interim.
Okay.
And he decided he wanted to go to Gammon, and he went to Gammon.
Okay. Well, great. I'm interested in the background of Rush Memorial Church since it was so central to the Atlanta University Center movement. Can you share with me anything about Rush, or even your recollections about Rush, or your assessment?
Okay, from the older members, many of them, most of them are deceased now. The church started over on the campus of Morris Brown,
Ah,
but it didn't stay there very long. It moved to a building next to Rush that's there now,
okay.
and the membership was upstairs. I'm sure not very, very many. John Rush, Reverend John Rush, had been a Methodist minister. And as churches go, there was a schism. One group went this way, one group went the other way. And those who went with Rush, with John Rush, formed the Rush Memorial Congregational Church. Of course, it was a name back then. I can't recall the name right now. But upon his death, they called it Rush Memorial.
Okay.
And the original building of Rush is no longer. It was in the back of the present building, just a small accommodating building, but it had a basement and upstairs for the Sunday school, and the part for the congregation for the regular services. During the early days of Rush, it had a it was very viable in the community. It's my understanding that the first Boy Scout troop for African Americans, for boys, grew out of the Rush Memorial Church.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to do some research to find out exactly how that came about.
Okay.
Along with that, Mrs. Rush, the wife of Dr. Rush, Reverend Rush, would do what we call selling. The churches up north would send clothing down to Rush Memorial Congregational Church, as they did the Northerners sent various items down to help out. And she would sell these items for a few cents. And she would turn that over to the church, and of course that's how they got the seed money for the building of the present building that's there now.
Okay.
And of course, if you had the money, you got it. If you wanted it and you didn't have the money, then she gave it to you.
Okay. So how did Reverend Boone get to Rush Memorial?
The minister before Joe got a call to another congregation, and the Rush Church issued what they call a call to Reverend Boone, who at the time was in Anniston, Alabama. And he was very, very outgoing in Anniston, very well liked. He had gone to Birmingham, the Alabama Conference. He had fraternized with the ministers in the Alabama Conference. That was Birmingham, Sylacauga, and around. So I think the word had gotten out that he was pretty well liked.
Okay.
So they issued a call. They wrote him a letter saying that they had a vacancy, and they offered it to him.
Okay. So when the students in Greensboro had that sit-in in 1960, what was your response? What was Reverend Boone's response or reaction to that?
In Greensboro,
Yes.
North Carolina.
When things were, at least when it started off.
When it really started off, he was really into it. He had a keen interest in it.
Okay.
He would look at television every day for it. I would glance at it, I'll be perfectly honest. I would glance, but I really wasn't into it like he was. I was into really trying to educate.
You were teaching it by this point in Atlanta.
Yes, I was teaching.
Where were you teaching?
Anniston, Alabama.
Okay, but then when you came to Atlanta.
Oh, when I came to Atlanta, in the 60s.
Where were you in February '60?
February 6th, I was in Anniston.
Still in Anniston.
Still
Oh,
in
I see.
Anniston.
Okay.
I was still in
But he
Anniston.
was here.
He was here.
I got you.
I would come home. I would come here on the weekends.
I see. Okay. Well, so when did you get to Atlanta?
I came to Atlanta permanently in March, the latter part of March in 1960.
Okay, so that means that you had missed the very beginning of the Atlanta University Center student movement.
Not kind of.
Okay,
Kind
well,
of,
what are
yeah.
your recollections of what happened around March here in Atlanta University Center on the campus?
I don't know exactly the timeline, but right around that time, the students were rallying on
Right.
campus, not
Okay.
at our church, on campus,
Uh-huh.
with the interest of desegregating, with the interest of trying to get things better.
Right. They had, by that time, I think March 9th, they had issued their appeal for human rights. That
Perhaps so.
would have been in the paper by then. So they were just getting into it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you recall, if anything, of his involvement with the students at that point, or even later?
Yeah, at that point, I know that the church started attracting a lot of young people from the University Center.
Ah,
Because see,
okay.
I would be here just on the weekends.
Uh-huh.
And we noticed that we had a lot of influx of younger people coming in. And I really feel the part that kind of sealed his fate with the Atlanta University students was his meeting Lonnie King.
Ah, okay.
Lonnie King was president of the student group for the whole Atlanta University Center during that time. And Joe was out, I understand, putting the date and the sermon's title on the marquee at the church. And Lonnie spoke and he spoke to Lonnie, and of course he said, "Oh man, what's the matter?" And Lonnie explained that Dr. Mays, who was then president of Morehouse, had told him he had to stop having the students rally. They had to just not have that on campus because they were there for an education, not for what was about to take place. And Lonnie was very depressed because he had nowhere to go. See, that was whatever Dr. Mays felt, that was the feeling of all the presidents throughout the system, throughout the education, the Atlanta school system, the Atlanta University system. So Joe simply said, like he always did, "Oh man, come on over here, you can come on use this church." Of course, he did that without consulting the trustees, without mentioning anything to the deacon board, without any of those things. And of course, Lonnie was relieved, he said. Lonnie told me that he was very, very, very elated. He went back and told them we got a place to meet. And that very night, I think they had about 200 students who came to Rush Memorial for the meeting. You can imagine what that created among the membership.
What did it? What was the reaction of the congregation?
At that time, there were some who they didn't have an opinion. There were others who did not want the students meeting in the building. Number one, they were too loud. Number two, really, there were too many. And they felt that, well, like older members, we have this building, we have this little sanctuary here, and we want to keep it nice and clean. Of course, the students were sitting all on the arms of the benches.
The pews.
See, yeah, the pews, because the church is really not built to accommodate a large number.
How many will it accommodate?
From the last funeral we had, I'll say now it will accommodate 300 if you pack them in. They packed them in. Really, about 100 comfortably.
Okay. All right.
So
Okay.
from there they met, and of course as the movement grew, They devised strategies from that church. They went out to the various targets from Rush Memorial Church. And of course, long after the movement, the student part of the movement had moved on to the other tentacles, other aspects. He continued to launch other projects from Rush Memorial Church.
Okay, before we leave the students though, so finally the congregation agreed to let the students use the church as a headquarters.
I suppose they did agree. It never really, some people moved over to the accepting part more than they had. There were others who embraced the movement. And Mrs. Lula Gordon, her daughter-in-law, Mrs. Alice Gordon, Mrs. Shirley Ottister, several others, Hattie Ottister, many others, Mrs. Jimmy Matthews. They were older, but they embraced the student movement.
Okay.
There were others who definitely did not want the student movement coming out of the church. They did not want him involved in the student movement because they said it took up his time. They had called him as a minister, and he just didn't have time, they felt, to do all these things that were for outside. Of course, knowing Joe and his personality and his ideas about doing things, they really hadn't said anything. He continued to do what he was doing.
So, what did it mean for the church to be a headquarters? Did it mean that it provided office space? Or how often would the students be holding meetings? How much was the church actually used as a headquarters?
The church was used daily, almost, I'm going to say 18 hours. Could have been very well 18 hours a day, because during the time that I had come over here, Mrs. Gordon and I would sell hot dogs and hot chocolate to the students. They would, I don't know how they had it worked out, but they would take shifts. They would come for whatever purposes they were meeting. And the church was the headquarters. It was the meeting place.
So it was a fully in operation. Okay. Do you recall any of the student meetings? Any ones in particular?
The one I recall, they were basically kind of on the same plan, but with different ideas. The strategy pretty much was the same. But I do remember the Thompson Bowling Lee part of the student movement.
Okay.
Whereby Thompson Bowling Lee was a shoe store in Atlanta, primarily in West End. It's the target that they started with. And the female students were instructed to try on shoes. This was the basic strategy, of course. You couldn't be violent. You had to be nonviolent no matter what happened. So at that time, if I wanted to buy a pair of shoes, I would have to try them on standing up. You know, it wasn't a thing whereby you were totally permitted to go sit. You could, eventually you got so you could sit down, but you'd have to try them on standing up. So the students filled the stores, wanted to try on shoes, and of course, nobody was buying any shoes. This shoe didn't fit. This shoe was not the right color. Something was wrong with the shoe, so they tied up the personnel in the store with the students trying on shoes, and that brought about the change in the seating policy when trying on shoes in the store. It brought about change for employment eventually in trying on the shoes, and it just brought about a new climate for the overall economic situation in Atlanta.
Right. Do you recall any of the other activities, such as the sit-ins? Was Reverend Boone involved in any of the actual activities, the sit-ins or the... protests?
So many labs,
He was at Leb's.
at labs.
What do you recall of his recollections about Leb's?
Labs and the Maddox situation. Whereby
Pickrick.
Pickrick.
Uh-huh.
I think the Pickrick one was really one whereby we all were somewhat afraid.
Okay.
We were really afraid that someone was going to get killed, someone was going to get really hurt there, because the atmosphere. I wasn't down at the Pickrick. I was. He didn't allow me to go down.
Okay.
The atmosphere was a very violent one, and I never asked him not to go, but I had a great concern about that one. Of course, the Richards Magnolia Room and all the others were carried out pretty much in sit-in fashion. And
Had he been at the Riches?
I can imagine so. I'm not
Okay.
sure about the Richards.
He was there.
He was
Great.
there.
Okay.
But I do know the Heart of Atlanta, desegregation of the hotel, the Heart of Atlanta, a group of ministers. Now, the students weren't exactly in this one.
Heart of Atlanta.
Heart of Atlanta Hotel.
All right.
One of the big hotels here at that time was called the Heart of Atlanta. And like many of the wives, I didn't know that they were going to actually sit in, but they did, and they were arrested. And word came to me, I think by phone, that they wanted all the wives to come to a meeting, a rally at Rush Memorial Church. And of course I went and had all the wives of the ministers who were in the rally, Mrs. Creasy, Mrs. Ward, several others, whereby they gave us consolation that our husbands would be all right, that this was a wonderful thing, that they had to break down these barriers, and the church was packed with people who gave us that support. Of course, I think it was Hollowell, I'm not sure who the lawyer was, but it was Hollowell, I think, who negotiated their bond, getting out, so that they were home some the same night, but he was one of those who chose to stay overnight, so it was the next day.
Okay. You had mentioned Lonnie King. Do you have any other recollections of any of the other student leaders?
Yeah, Otis Moss.
Otis Moss.
Presently a minister in Cleveland, Ohio. Julian Bond. Julian Bond was really a regular. He was always there.
What do you recall of Otis Moss?
Otis Moss, with his very quiet air, very, very passionate zeal for what he was doing. From time to time, he would speak. He was not the Lonnie King. He was not the leader of it at that, during that time. But they all had input into the various things that they were doing.
Right. Okay. What about Charles Black? Do you recall him?
The name only.
Okay. Okay. And Ben Brown?
Ben Brown, I knew from a somewhat personal standpoint.
Okay.
I later taught his sister. Ben Brown was very, very fervent in working there, doing the movement.
Okay. Did Reverend Boone have any involvement or contact with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC?
Yeah.
Okay. What would those contacts have been?
Those contacts were basically, I really think, for advice, for counsel, for giving direction, along with many of the other ministers.
Okay.
See, our church was open, and although it was his church, other ministers were with him, because at that time he was a member of the Ministerial Alliance. They had formed a Ministerial Alliance that was made primarily of ministers who were not Baptist ministers. There were some Baptist ministers on it, because I remember Walter McCall very well. But this was like, if you were Congregationals, you were Methodist, you were whatever else, Primitive Baptist or whatever, they had an alliance.
Oh, okay.
And they met once or twice at Rush. I do recall, because we fixed the dinner for them. Exactly what they did and what in the meeting, I don't know.
Okay.
But they had formed a ministerial alliance.
Okay. And then I understand that there was a student adult liaison committee to try to maintain unity within the student movement. And I understand that Reverend Boone was a part of that. Do you recall anything specifically of that?
No, nothing specifically about that, other than I kind of think at this point, the Stokely Carmichael and the others in that group were moving on the scene, and they felt that it was time to move to another level. And that other level, I feel the adults felt, was not tempering it enough. They wanted to be out there more vocal, doing more things that the older people kind of felt agitated. So the purpose of the adult liaison committee was to kind of keep things moving in an acceptable fashion.
Right. Okay. What I know that there were various groups within Atlanta. There was an old guard. There was a younger guard, and I suppose Reverend Boone was part of that young adult guard. And then there were the students. What do you recall of the old guard, say, A.T. Walden and John Calhoun and Warren Cochran and John Wesley Dobbs and Borders, for example, Martin Luther King Sr.?
Those Martin, I knew Dr. King Sr. better. I knew Borders somewhat, but the others I only knew by sight or by name.
Okay.
I don't know too much about them.
Okay.
Now, Dr. King Sr. met with the Ministerial Alliance. He was at Rush Church for many of the student meetings. But Calhoun and those, I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. I know that Reverend Boone had a lot of involvement with Operation Breadbasket. Can you share anything with me about that as it became really a very important part of SCLC's program here, starting out in Atlanta and then later even with Chicago and Jesse Jackson pretty much taking off with that. But do you recall anything of Operation Breadbasket and Reverend Boone's involvement in that?
He had been appointed by Martin, young Dr. King, to be the chief negotiator for Operation Breadbasket. This was the economic arm of SCLC, whereby they would go in and negotiate the terms. They would negotiate the terms of the situation to try to get rid of jobs. Those who had no jobs, try to get jobs for those people who were qualifiable, because the word was out, they're not qualified.
Right.
But there's a difference, we all know, between being qualified and qualifiable. And his term was generally qualifiable, to train them, to get them into positions whereby they could earn. At the Big Apple here, one of the grocery chains, we had never had black cashiers.
Okay.
And I had shopped several years, 2 or 3 years, going to Big Apple. That was the place to go. But your cashier was always Caucasian. Of course, with Operation Breadbasket, they patterned it after Sullivan's program. And
Leon Sullivan.
Leon Sullivan's program, and started working in various cities, not only Atlanta, but in northern cities, because on Sunday, he would come in here on Saturday night. I would pick him up at the airport. He would preach on Sunday, and Sunday evening I would take him back to catch a flight. It could be to basically Chicago or any other city north where they were working on different projects. Sometimes he would come in during the week. That's when they were really getting it formatted and really working to get better jobs in many places. They're too numerous to name. But he was the main person, and there were several call men that worked with him. They call them call men, like J.C. Ward, Howard Creasy, Reverend Dorsey. What was Dorsey's first name, Joe? Reverend Dorsey.
He's old, man. He's a old man,
Yeah, he was. Reverend Dorsey and several others who were on that arm of the movement.
What about Fred Bennett? Didn't he also
yes,
work
Fred
on
Bennett.
the Operation Breadbasket?
He worked with Breadbasket, and he was called the commandant because he engineered a lot of activities. He was one of the hit men.
Okay, great. Okay, we talk often in the movement about the leaders, student leaders, the young adults, the old guard. What about the ordinary folk? Who were the followers? Who were the people that supported the movement at all levels?
There were myriads of people who really, I feel, supported the movement. Cotton Rita is, to me, I just have to call him by the last name because that's what we always call him. He's one of the unsung heroes.
Who is that?
Cotton Rita.
Cotton Rita.
His name is really Cotton Rita.
How do you spell that?
Cotton. And I believe it's Reeder, or it could be Reader.
Okay.
But he was always there, no matter what went down on the battlefield. He's around somewhere now, I'm not sure exactly where. But he was always one of those people who was positive about what they were trying to do. Now, the general population, general public, I feel that they were with the movement. Of course, you always got some who will be with you, but they won't be shown. You know, for various reasons. Many of them worked in the capacity whereby they could not afford to be out there. Otherwise, their bread was cut off.
Right.
And many people, you know, they were just not willing to have that done. The maids, we call them the maids, the housekeepers, the butlers, the men who did the yards, they were supportive. They would be behind the scene doing whatever they were called upon to do, I feel. I really think that was part of the success of the movement.
And the students were pretty close to that group.
As far as I can tell.
That's great. There is a meeting they always talk about at Warren Memorial Church after Lonnie King and Herschel Sullivan had been pressured by the downtown business establishment to really discontinue the protest, to wait until the desegregation of schools in the fall of '61, and of course the students were reluctant to do that. But as Lonnie King tells the story, they were really kind of tricked into agreeing to something that once it came out in the press, it was something very, very different from what they thought they were agreeing to. But nevertheless, everybody was very upset about that compromise or that agreement. And then there was a meeting at Warren Memorial Church when the community as well as the students faced the old guard, the young guard, and the students on that. Were you by any chance at that meeting, or did you hear anything about that meeting?
No, I don't recall
Okay.
that meeting.
Yeah, because I think Lonnie King tells a story that Reverend Boone was there, and I think it was Reverend Boone that told him that he didn't have a responsibility to stand up and calm the crowd, because the crowd was really very, very upset. But I think that was one of the ways that Lonnie King brought in Reverend Boone there. Let's talk about the Poor People's Campaign, because Reverend Boone had a role in that. Can you share with us what that was?
This is the one after the death of Martin.
Yeah.
Really, Joe was really on, I call it a spin. He would say things, run tidbits by.
Mm-hmm.
The only part of that part of the Poor People's Campaign that I remember is that we went to Washington. He and I and our older daughter went to Washington. And, of course, there was so many people. So I couldn't get near to where the action really was.
Oh, okay.
So I just camped out on the grass with many of the other people who were just there, and we talked. And you were trying to get something to eat, and there was a strict law whereby I think we only had hot dogs that day, and maybe something to drink. Exactly what he did in getting that together, getting that organized with all the other people he was working with. He didn't do it by himself.
Right.
But he had been asked to get it together. He's a great leader.
Yeah,
Many
and
people
also, as I
follow him.
understand, that first leg,
Yeah.
getting the people to Atlanta before they even got to Washington, there was a logistical
Yeah, and things to do.
thing to
Because
get everybody housed and fed.
they came through here, and I remember the concert at the Civic Center.
Okay.
That was relatively new at that time. The Civic Center was new, and the Temptations and what's the female group to the Temptations? Can't think of their names right now.
You're not talking about the Supremes, are
That's
you?
right.
Oh, okay.
The Supremes and the Temptations had a beautiful show
Okay.
for the people who were journeying to go to Washington. They had stopped here. He rounded up the space, made sure that they had adequate space, and calls went out throughout the city, and I suppose the county, for housing, for food, for clothing, to help them on the next, they call it the next leg of the journey.
Right. Yeah. Okay. What does Reverend Boone think about the legacy of the movement? Where are we? What has it achieved? What is left yet to do?
There's still a lot to be done.
Still a lot to be done.
There's still a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any particular areas do you think that he might feel needs a lot more work?
Are there any areas you feel that need a lot of work doing on it?
Back in the old days, probably not as bad as it was.
Okay. He has always been very, very keen on the economic side, improving the economic situation, because, working together, living together, and talking together, at the bottom of it, he always felt that the inequities caused many of the problems. The fact that you got to scuffle for food. You working just as hard or maybe harder, but you don't have the income to provide for your family and for your children. He's really, really keen on the economic side. I think that's why he was rather effective in the Operation Breadbasket and opening up the jobs with Kmart and with Woolworth and the myriad of even Avon
Okay.
products. There's a Mr. Broughton who sings his praises every time he sees me about how he moved, how he got employed at Avon and eventually retired from Avon, seemingly with a satisfactory pension.
Okay.
So if I had to say anything, I would think it would be the economic aspect and the educational aspect, because he really, in doing his ministry, when before he retired, we had several programs that we really tried to focus on for the youth in the church. The importance of education, how to be the best that you could possibly be, how to be creative, and make that which you don't have, you create it so that you can create your job, so that you can be useful to humanity, to society.
Okay, now I know that there's many other things that Reverend Boone has done in this area. One that I just read about was, I didn't realize that he was the one that had organized the Afro-American Patrolmen's League. And then I guess what would be the counterpart, Firemen's League as well. Do you recall anything specifically about that effort?
The only thing that I can say about perhaps the Patrolmen's League is that there was just an overwhelming amount of police brutality. And seemingly the black policemen that just had come aboard, their hands were really tied. And this was to better the conditions for them. All the terms of it, I don't know, don't understand. But there's a Billy McKinney, you know. Billy McKinney?
Oh, yeah.
He probably can really horn you in on the league.
Great. Okay. What's your feeling about Atlanta? It's often said that Atlanta is a city too busy to hate. Is that true?
That's a very, very wrenching question, I must admit. We come forth when we're out there, we have to show the good side. We always step out on the good foot. But underneath, I really feel that the opportunities should be greater. The training should be better. And I'm going to say this on a personal note. The program, the cyber program that was launched a few years ago really gave impetus to what I feel we should be about.
What is that cyber program?
The cyber program was where, under the leadership of Mayor Campbell,
Okay.
they had the computers in various sites throughout Atlanta that gave older Atlantans the opportunity to hone in on this aspect of American life. It's a fact. Many would not have had the opportunity to even know what a keyboard was or touch a mouse.
Okay.
Not only talking about to go to Word or the internet, but this program brought the retired, the older Americans, those who were not as affluent, who could not afford to purchase a computer, the opportunity to really kind of see what was happening, to be abreast of the modern world, rather than that divide.
Right.
For those, see, you know, the younger people are going to have it, they got it. But then here we need it, but we still didn't have it.
Yeah.
I feel we need to really, really work on those. There's so many aspects of that for bringing the quality of life to those of us who gonna have the quantity of life. We're living longer, health is better with the modern technology, medicines, but we must also have the opportunities. Now, Atlanta is an exception. It has some beautiful centers for the elderly, the aged. But somewhere along the line, those people, it worries me when I see the homeless. It really does. There are various reasons for why they are homeless. Maybe some of them are authentic and some of them are not authentic. I don't know. But we really need to really hone in on that aspect of our lives and try to help those who are less prepared or less able to do.
Right. Yeah. Okay, in the few minutes remaining, is there anything else you'd like to share about Reverend Boone's contributions, your assessment, his assessment of the situation?
One aspect that I'd like to perhaps mention is that he was instrumental in the desegregation of the Atlanta Public Schools teachers, the teaching staff. I worked with Dr. Moreland, the late Dr. Moreland now, the late Dr. Boone, and getting it to make a smooth transition. The educational situation once, of course, is almost back to what it was, for various reasons. Seemingly throughout the country, it's moving back. But he was very, very instrumental in helping to make that transition smooth for the Caucasian teachers and administrators, as well as for us who were in just the black schools. The ratio, generally, they tried to have it 50-50, which worked pretty much. The transition, I feel, was a good transition. I was in the transition. Of course, I felt that I should not have been transitioned to where I was.
Where were you teaching?
I was at Washington High School.
Okay.
And I was given a position at Dykes High School up on the north side. And as we worked, I didn't accept the position at Dykes.
Why?
Well, really, to be perfectly honest with you, there were two reasons. I felt that I had surgery. I had a small baby. And I felt that to go from where I lived up to Dykes just wasn't feasible for me. That was one aspect. And of course I asked that I not be given that position. They attempted to work it out that semester. I was sent to Southwest. Of course, the principal there rejected me. He said he didn't need a foreign language teacher.
Now, Southwest at that time was a white school.
White school.
White school.
High school.
Okay.
And of course, I had to go back to the area superintendent, who was very, very, very kind, very nice, very understanding, Caucasian.
Who was that?
I can't recall his name. I believe he was, I don't know, I won't say because I'm not sure, but he's a very wonderful person. He talked to the principal at Thurl. I believe that principal's name was Mumford, who accepted me. And I worked with another African-American teacher, kind of like assisting her, which was, I had no problems with that because it gave the children really more individual work, more hands-on. the population was primarily from Fort Mac. The parents of those children
Okay.
were basically Army personnel
Okay.
who lived out in that section of the town. The school was white
Uh-huh.
for about 6 black students when I went there in 1970, 71. But that was the 1970, the spring of that year. I had no problems with that, but eventually I was given a position at Kennedy Middle School. And as I look upon it, Kennedy Middle School was set up with the guidelines, the 50-50. I was the French teacher, and the Spanish teacher was from Puerto Rico. Same thing with the economics teacher. One was Caucasian, one was black. A very beautiful situation. Of course, as time moved, many of them sought other places, to move.
Well, because at that time, Kennedy Middle School was all black, right?
Yes.
Just about all black.
Yeah, it was black. We had a few whites who came from the north side to that school. It was a new school.
Yeah.
It was a new school. But the personnel, the teachers in the school, just about 50-50.
Okay.
And it worked very well. We had a beautiful school. Beautiful school. And Mr. Ralph Long was over the center. It was a school whereby the center concentrated primarily on the residents of the community. And these were parents whose children went to school there. And Ralph Long was very, very, very adamant about seeing that in that part of the city, Vine City, that those children and those parents had the same opportunities as best he could that the others had on the north side.
What year was that you were teaching?
That was 1970, I'm going to say 71.
Okay.
71, because the fall of 70, I was what they call itinerant. I taught foreign languages in 4 of the elementary schools. I went to different schools, during the week. But the next year, they had completed the facility totally. And the students, the Kennedy students that were in those elementary schools were brought into the middle school site.
Okay. That's an important story in Atlanta, that whole school desegregation of students and teachers. And it'd be great if I could interview alone on that. But I certainly appreciate what you have done this morning in allowing us to come and recognize Reverend Boone, and thank you for helping to tell his story.
Thank you very
Getting
much
this on
for
record.
having me. Thank you.
Thank you.